The Wild Muir, 22 of John Muir's greatest adventures, Rattlesnakes. Despite an early prejudice against them, Muir's encounters with rattlesnakes, once with his face only a foot away from fangs, eventually taught him that scales may cover as fine a nature as hair or feathers or anything tailored. He was also quick to recognize the value of snakes to agricultural interests in the Central Valley of California, knowing that they were providing efficient rodent control. There are many snakes in the canyons and lower forests, but they are mostly handsome and harmless. Of all the tourists and travelers who have visited Yosemite and the adjacent mountains, not one has been bitten by a snake of any sort, while thousands have been charmed by them. Some of them vie with lizards in beauty of color and dress patterns. Only the rattlesnake is venomous, and he carefully keeps his venom to himself as far as man is concerned, unless his life is threatened. Before I learned to respect rattlesnakes, I killed two. The first on the San Joaquin Plain. He was coiled comfortably around a tuft of bunch grass, and I discovered him when he was between my feet as I was stepping over him. He held his head down and did not attempt to strike, although in danger of being trampled. At the time, 30 years ago, I imagined that rattlesnakes should be killed wherever found. I had no weapon of any sort, and on the smooth plain there was not a stick or stone within miles, so I crushed him by jumping on him, as the deer are said to do. Looking me in the face, he saw I meant mischief and quickly cast himself into a coil, ready to strike in defense. I knew he could not strike when traveling, therefore I threw handfuls of dirt and grass sods at him to tease him out of coil. He held his ground a few minutes, threatening and striking, and then started off to get rid of me. I ran forward and jumped on him, but he drew back his head so quickly my heel missed, and he almost missed his stroke at me. Persecuted, tormented again and again, he tried to get away, bravely striking out to protect himself. But at last my heel came squarely down, sorely wounding him, and a few more brutal stampings crushed him. I felt degraded by the killing business, farther from heaven, and made up my mind to try to be at least fair and charitable as the snakes themselves, and to kill no more save in self-defense. The second killing might also, I think, have been avoided, and I've always felt somewhat sore and guilty about it. I had built a little cabin in Yosemite, and for convenience in getting water and for the sake of music and society, I led a small stream from Yosemite Creek into it, running alongside of the wall, and it was not in the way, and it had just fall enough to ripple and sing in low, sweet tones, making delightful company, especially at night when I was lying awake. Then a few frogs came in and made merry with the stream, and one snake, I suppose, to catch the frogs. Returning from my long walks, I usually brought home a large handful of plants, partly for study, partly for ornament, and set them in the corner of the cabin, with their stems in the stream to keep them fresh. One day I picked up a handful that had begun to fade, and I uncovered a large coiled rattler that had been hiding behind the flowers. Thus suddenly brought to light, face to face with the rightful owner of the place, the poor reptile was desperately embarrassed, evidently realizing that he had no right in the cabin. It was not only fear that he showed, but a good deal of downright bashfulness and embarrassment, like that of a more than half honest person caught under suspicious circumstances behind a door. Instead of striking or threatening to strike, though coiled and ready, he slowly drew his head down as far as he could, with awkward, confused kinks in his neck and a shamefaced expression, as if wishing the ground would open up and hide him. I have looked into the eyes of so many animals, and that I feel sure I did not mistake the feelings of this unfortunate snake. I did not want to kill him, but I had many visitors, some of them children, and I oftentimes came late at night, and so I judged he must die. Since then, I have seen perhaps 100 or more in these mountains, but I have never intentionally disturbed them, nor have they disturbed me to any great extent, even by accident, though in danger of being stepped on. Once, while I was on my knees kindling a fire, one glided under the arch made by my arm. He was only going away from the ground I had selected for a camp, and there was not the slightest danger because I kept still and allowed him to go in peace. The only time I felt myself in serious danger was when I was coming out of the Tuolumne Canyon by a steep side canyon toward the head of Yosemite Creek. On an earthquake talus, a boulder in my way presented a front so high that I could just reach the upper edge of it while standing on the next below it. Drawing myself up, as soon as my head was above the flat top of it, I caught sight of a coiled rattler. My hands had alarmed him, and he was ready for me. But even with this provocation, and when my head came in sight within a foot of him, he did not strike. The last time I sauntered through the big canyon, I saw about 2 a day. One was not coiled, but neatly folded in a narrow place between 2 cobblestones on the side of the river, his head below the level of them, ready to shoot up like a jack-in-a-box for frogs or birds. My foot spanned the space above him within an inch or 2 of his head, but he held it lower, and making my way through a particularly tedious tangle of buckthorn, I parted the branches on the side of an open spot and threw my bundle of bread into it, and then, with my arms free, I was pushing through after it. I saw a small rattlesnake dragging his tail from beneath my bundle. When he caught sight of me, he eyed me angrily, and with an air of righteous indignation, seemed to be asking why I had thrown that stuff on him. He was so small, and I was inclined to slight him, but he struck out so angrily that I drew back, and approaching the opening from the other side. But he had been listening, and when I looked through the brush, I found him confronting me, still with a "come in if you dare" expression. In vain I tried to explain that I only wanted my bread. He stoutly held the ground in front of it, and so I went back a dozen rods and kept still for half an hour, and when I returned he had gone. On the evening near sundown, in a very rough, boulder-choked portion of the canyon, I searched long for a level spot for a bed, and at last was glad to find a patch of flood sand on the river bank and a lot of driftwood close by for a campfire. But when I threw down my bundle, I found 2 snakes in possession of the ground. I might have passed the night even in the snake den without danger, for I never knew a single instance of their coming into camp at night. But fearing that in so small a space, some latecomers, not aware of my presence, might get stepped on when I was replenishing the fire, to avoid possible crowding, I encamped on one of the earthquake boulders.